and welcome to another episode of We're Not Wizards. My name's Richard. I will be your host for this morning, or this evening, or this afternoon, or whenever, because after all, it's your podcast. Joining me today, this is a quick start on the Kickstart episode, and what we do in a quick start on a Kickstart episode is it's when we basically have a creator who has a project which is either just about to launch on Kickstarter, or is on Kickstarter, or is just about to finish on Kickstarter, and we bring them on to have a quick chat about the project and a very quick chat about themselves. So joining me all the way from sunny Canada is Artem Safarov from Altema Games. So, hello, Artem.
Hi, Richard. This is the first time someone with a Scottish accent says my name, and I love it. One of my resolutions coming into this podcast was to try not to get into my terrible impersonation of a Scottish accent, because I think it's amazing.
I want to hear.
No, you do not. You do not.
I do.
I without error, I will downgrade it somewhere towards like between pirate and Pakistani, and no one wants to hear that. Just listen to my natural, beautiful hints of Russian, and we'll just stick with that.
That'll be fine. We'll just run with run with that. The reason that we do episodes like this is because it's always good to hear about Kickstarters. It's always good to hear about kind of Kickstarters from new creators and designers. And it's also it's always good to hear about designers who are releasing games that are of the solo play kind of variety, because the game itself is unbroken. And what we like to do is we like to find out a little bit about the creator. We're going to find out a little bit about Artem, and then we're going to find out a little bit about Unbroken, because I'm fascinated to hear what this is about, because solo play games seems to be a solo variant, seems to be something that that is kind of that is asked for an awful lot in kind of multiple game Kickstarters. And I know there's a lot of people, like both sides of the table, for instance, who specialise in talking about games that you can do solo play variants. So Artem, how did you kind of get into the hobby?
Well, I think for me it all started with my deep-seated love of all things fantasy, and I used to play a whole lot of Dungeons and Dragons when I was younger. And role-playing games like D&D, they require quite a lot of time, because a good session should run, several hours. I think as I started getting older and getting, less free time for games with more serious work and family and children, I found that board games offered this amazing condensed experience of telling the stories that I love so much in this very interactive, engaging way, with much less of an investment of time. So I really, I think for the last 7 or so years have been really into board gaming, just sort of, I think encountering this hobby much as many other people have, with the amazing number of new games that have been hitting the market. And then in 2015, because I have enjoyed making things always, that's when I have created and launched my first the game that I have designed and developed. It was called Cauldron, a board game of competitive alchemy. That did quite well on Kickstarter. We raised around $30,000. So we have delivered that project to our backers late in 2015. Managed to get that to backers a couple of months earlier than we expected. That was always nice for Kickstarters.
Yeah.
I think after that there was a bit of a period of just sort of reflection and just rest, because Kickstarters are stressful and effort intensive. But after a while I did realize that this is something that I enjoy very much, and it coincided with this rise of interest for me in games that could be played solo, because as I mentioned, I have 2 boys at home. And
yes,
it's not really easy for me to get out to play a lot, but I do like playing games. So I have been finding more and more interest in gaming that can be done solo. And for that reason, I started doing a lot of exploration of solo games, and it's a wonderful world out there. And what was even more exciting and interesting and unexpected for me was that there's a huge, very engaged community of solo gamers, which is not something you would expect because, it's a bunch of people who like to play games by themselves. But it turns out they also really like talking about the games that they play, and it's really such an amazing community. If anyone is listening who wants a great Facebook group, the Solo Board Gamers on Facebook is the best group that I belong to. I highly suggest a little caution. It will cost you some money because you will want to buy all the games that people are talking about.
What are your games of choice when you're solo playing yourself? What kind of games do you like kind of dipping into?
Well, I think my favorite solo game at this moment is the Lord of the Rings living card game. For a couple of reasons. One is that I'm a huge Tolkien fan, and I think that game does a wonderful job of bringing the world of Middle Earth to life. Just to give you an example of how much of a Tolkien fan I am, here I am in my work office, and I have a map of Middle Earth proudly displayed on my wall, just for everyone to know, what my interests are. It's a great conversation starter.
What do people say? Is that the first thing that you do? Do you say, "Hi, I'm Artem, and here is my map"?
Yeah, maps, right? There's a map of Westeros right next to it.
Oh, right.
So, but it's okay, Sometimes there was one person who came in who, we have these like intro interviews for new people who come in, and he immediately comes in and like points out to my map of Westeros and starts, discussing how he never could understand where the citadel was and like what are all the maesters doing there. I'm like, okay, I will like you. So it's like it's a test, for people who are cool, who I can immediately strike up a conversation with. So yeah, and another reason for why I really enjoy the Lord of the Rings living card game is because there is so much flexibility in how you play that, and so much content that Fantasy Flight Games pumps out for that.
I mean, and do you prefer to play a solo game? Or are you in the situation with kind of like family life and work life that you're ending up kind of playing kind of solo games not through choice? I mean, would you still buy kind of maybe the kind of your popular kind of, not popular because that's saying solo games aren't popular, but would you buy some of the games that people are always kind of talking about to see if you can play it solo, or if there's maybe a solo variant that you can bring in yourself?
Not particularly. What I have always found, and I think we right now with the board gaming hobby, we're basically spoiled in that there is so much choice that's available to us. So settling for something like, having to find a solo variant for a game that doesn't support it, or, finding a game that, maybe you would enjoy, but it has too much luck in it, but you don't like luck, maybe you don't like dice. You can always find a game that is much closer to exactly what you want, and that therein I think is why we're spoiled. But it's also good because it means that we don't have to settle. So for me, I don't really enjoy playing games that have like dummy players that you play against. And that is often sort of the MO of introducing solo play, even though, I'm certain that there are many game designers who do that very well. Obviously, the work on Stonemaier games clearly shows that their Altema system really does a good job of keeping people engaged and allowing people who wouldn't be able to otherwise, play with the gorgeous miniatures of Scythe to get it to the table. But it's just not.
Do you not jump into like war games as well though? Because I know that Katie's Game Corner, she talks often about playing kind of a lot of the solo variants of the kind of the war games that you get out there. Is that something that you get into as well, or do you leave that
not
kind of
particularly?
Kind of
and I'm glad you bring Katie up. I want to do a shout out because Katie is my absolute favorite recent discovery in the world of board game media creators. I think the work that Katie does is just fantastic, and she just brings such a needed voice to our hobby that I love that you brought her up. And I also, unlike Katie, I'm not advanced enough to play the kind of war games that she talks about. So I am a simpler man in terms of my my tastes because anytime people play war games, with a squad tactics and detailed stats for every single unit, it's not my jam. I like my abstraction that allows me to feel that I am having an adventure, and I don't need to like in that campaign for North Africa, count up my spaghetti tokens for my soldiers.
So, I mean, after Cauldron, I mean, what made you decide? I mean, was it that your current situation, was it that made you decide, actually, I'm going to go ahead and make my own kind of solo game then?
One of the reasons for that is that because of the whole family reasons, I was all constrained in what I would be able to achieve in terms of getting my game to people for testing. Because obviously any good design has to be tested thoroughly in order to be good, in order to be, not just something that you dreamt up, but something that works for people and not just your friends who will say things that you make are good. And there is this great upside of designing a solo game because you always have the needed number of players.
Yeah.
So
do you have to be quite strict when you're designing a solo game? And I'll tell you the reason why. Okay, I am quite rubbish when it comes to kind of spoilers in movies. If I can find out a spoiler, there'll be 95% of me will be like, I don't want to know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then 5% of me will be the guy that jumps onto the internet and finds out the spoiler. And it's the same with like solo games. I remember I used to play the is it the Fighting Fantasy flick books that you get,
Yep.
And you could always know I was playing one of them because I'd be holding the book in one hand and I'd have 4 fingers within the pages of the hand where I'd highlighted where all the different kind of outcomes were going to be, so I could basically go, oh, I don't like that outcome, I'll try the next one out. That kind of thing. So when you're playing a solo game, is it difficult to get the balance? I mean, has it been difficult to kind of get the balance on something like Unbroken?
Well, there are a couple of ways to answer that. One is more technical. Some of the background I have professionally is with statistics and math. So one of the first things I do before I even start putting together the first components for a game is I create a math model that governs everything that happens in the game from sort of the numbers perspective. And that kind of ensures that it starts off already from this very unbiased kind of by the numbers logic that then based on how it goes in testing, I can, adjust slightly here or there, but mm-hmm. I can be certain that it starts and it is based not just on whimsy and kind of like guesstimating, but a specific set of formulas that govern, the difficulty and the exchange rates, etc., etc. Now, in terms of ensuring that, people don't feel bad regardless of how well they are doing, and that was definitely a goal for me because I always intended Unbroken to be a difficult game that people would not win at often. My sort of strategy for that is to make sure that much like what Dwarf Fortress has taught us, dying can be fun. So I think it's all about the kind of stories that your games tell, and these should be fun and exciting regardless of whether you win or lose. And a great example of this is Space Hulk Death Angel, which is also it's technically a multiplayer co-op game, but it's very playable, and I think most people enjoy it solo. It's about Warhammer 40,000 group of space marines who are exploring this alien-infested sort of old spaceship. And it's not easy to win there, but the game constantly develops and it creates these very tense, dynamic moments that feel epic regardless of whether you're winning or losing. So that to me was kind of like the feeling that I was trying to instill, that, it's not your success that determines how much you're enjoying the game. It's the intensity of the story that unfolds before your eyes.
Did you ever play Dark Souls?
You know what? I have very low experience with Dark Souls specifically as a game, mostly because I have never been a console player. But one of the players who have done, I think, the most testing of Unbroken, I think one of my favorite quotes from him is that Unbroken is more Dark Souls than Dark Souls the board game. And that was
we went there. Okay.
Well,
Okay.
again, I know of the sort of the atmosphere that the game tries to evoke, but
Yes.
it's difficult for me to speak to it not having played either the board game or the video game. What I have played extensively is a game called Darkest Dungeon. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
Yes. Yes, I am. It's an astonishing game in the fact that it says, okay, you've not just decided to take on a dungeon, but how do you actually feel now that you've taken on the dungeon?
Yep.
And it puts players under stress. It puts players under duress. It kind of enters into the world of kind of like mental illness. I mean, no, the reason I ask the question about Dark Souls is because that is when I was looking at it, that's one of the first things I guess I kind of thought. It was a solo player game where you were essentially, you're the only, as it says, you're the only remaining adventurer who barely escapes a monster ambush that claims the lives of all of their friends. So you have to get their bearings, equip yourselves, and reclaim their freedom as you fight your way out of the monster-infested catacombs. Now, that to me, the plot line would fit very, very along kind of Dark Souls. And that, if this is what you're saying Unbroken is about, there's a little bell in my head that starts a ringing.
Good.
It goes, I am, this color me kind of interested because, I'll admit, and I've said this before, I play the Dark Souls board game kind of solo play because you can do that, but it's kind of there for solo play, but there's a couple of fudges that you have to do, and which is fair enough. But if you're saying to me, this is a survival. I mean, why don't you go into the mechanics a bit? Tell us about actually what you're doing kind of in the game itself, Artem, I guess.
So you covered the basic premise of the game, that you do in fact wake up being the lone survivor of a terrible monster ambush and have to navigate your way through these dangerous caverns and hopefully find some scraps to make some weapons with. And you only have a limited number of time to regain your strength and gather supplies because the monsters who've killed your friends there are after you. So after some time passes, they will attack. So you have to always balance your long-term preparation with the short-term staying alive against the current foe that you are facing. The mechanics of the game are unusual somewhat for a dungeon crawler because they are mostly about resource management, and that's intentional because I wanted to make a game that is less dependent on the die rolls or the card draws and more so on the planning and the decisions that a character could take, so that players would feel agency and investment in the choices that they make, and a certain lack of certainty because you never are quite sure what the right way to do things is, because depending on which monsters you're going to face, different strategies would be differently effective. And there is always a trick that you could spend some of your resources to learn more about the danger, the monster that you're going to encounter, what's going to be more effective against it. But doing so means that you now have less time, less strength left to prepare yourself for that fight. So it's always like this kind of trade-off of certainty versus ability that I was really trying to go for. The game itself mostly is, so as you go through this preparation stage, you have different encounters in the dungeon that either allows you to use your wits to collect some resources, or interact with the less violent inhabitants of the caverns that you find, or just even if nothing else, is just a chance to rest up, or maybe you get a chance to bury one of your friends that inspires you to greatness and to new heights of violence as you're going to avenge them. It's dark, and intentionally so, because I always find that I think the market is so oversaturated with, especially with fantasy, that people take sort of shortcuts, and going into the dungeon is just like this one generalization of cliches. And if you do stop for a second and think about everything that's involved in there, people who might probably are like poorly prepared for it are going somewhere to risk their lives just to get greedy and to murder other creatures. I think there is still a lot of things to get excited about in that premise and to be scared of. And that's what Unbroken tries to do. It tries to deconstruct this experience that I think we now take for granted, and to take and examine the individual parts of that experience in all of their, grotesque nature that is still scary, I think, that is still tense, suspenseful, that makes you feel that you are making these life or death decisions as you're trying to fight off monsters who are not caricatures. They are evil sentient creatures that want you dead for a reason. And the only way, well, actually not the only way, you can actually trick the monsters in the game. There are two ways you can deal with most monsters, and you can either fight them or you can use resources that you have collected to trick them, so avoiding the fight altogether. That way you don't get... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, did you want to completely mitigate kind of the luck aspect then? I mean, was that important to you? Because I've seen games where, and the usual suspects in a kind of like a dungeon crawling game, where you can have the best equipment, but you can still get into a spot where if you're rolling poorly, it doesn't matter how well you've done so far in the game, you can end up getting kind of wiped out extremely quickly. So was that the point? You wanted it to be, listen, you've got to be analytical here, you've got to plan here, you've got to know what you're doing here in order to kind of actually win.
So I like that you use the term mitigate as opposed to eliminate. I wanted to make sure that luck is still in the game, but it's not the prevalent determinant of how well someone does. My personal rule is that I want some excitement in the game. I want there to be sort of critical junctures where you can either do a facepalm or pump your fist in excitement based on an outcome that you are not sure about. And I find that games that are entirely, predictable and static in the way that they unravel, think your Agricolas and etc. I think as smart and engaging as they are, they don't allow for that kind of excitement. So in Unbroken, it's basically half and half. All of the actions of the character are resolved without relying on luck. So if you've banked enough strength to land powerful hits, you'll land those powerful hits. If you've planned enough to have some armor, it will protect you. The randomness comes in that you are never sure which challenge you are going to be up against. And as I mentioned again, you can sort of have a peek at what you will get. So again, it's your choice. Do you want to know in advance and spend some of the resources or not? The biggest randomness component that comes in is when you decide what the monster is going to do, and for that you just roll a die, and depending on the die roll, the monster triggers different effects that they could potentially have. And that's really where the randomness comes in, and that's where if they roll high, you will be doing a facepalm, and if they roll low and maybe even miss entirely, you will be pumping your fist in excitement. So it contributes to the fact that you are using your planning to overcome constantly changing obstacles with constantly changing resources, because maybe based on what the monster is doing, maybe you're fighting like a very hungry cave bear, and he just goes straight for your food and just like eats everything that you had, and now after beating him you won't have enough food to eat and you starve. Or maybe you're fighting a vampire and you really need a stake to get through her heart to truly defeat her, and she will try to get rid of all your wood just so that you can't do that. So it's that kind of mix of luck and planning that I was trying to go for, where I wanted to make sure that the player never feels that they themselves can't do something because the dice didn't let them, but it's more like the obstacles that they have to overcome are constantly changing because of factors that are not always within their control.
Can they? How long does it play for? I mean, can a player run a campaign, or are they kind of restricted? Are they kind of playing for an hour at a time, a couple of hours at a time? Can they string kind of different scenarios together?
So right now there is no campaign mode. It's focused, and that's the way I've always kind of imagined it and envisioned it. It's a short game by design. It's played within 20 to 30 minutes, and it's meant to provide this kind of self-contained, brief, tense, challenging experience within that short playtime. Because again, as I mentioned, it's a kind of game that I want people to be able to play with as little restrictions as possible. And time can often be a restriction as much as number of players for people. I mean, I would love to play more Eldritch Horror, but opportunities for me to set aside 2-3 hours for playing something are few and far between. Whereas games like Friday or Lost Expedition, One Deck Dungeon, all of those make it to my table much more frequently because they don't require as much of a commitment. So I was trying to make Unbroken fit into that short sort of get your fix kind of a category. What it doesn't do in campaign mode, I think it does introduce to some way in learning curve. So it's a game that you need to play several times to become better at, to understand what you should be going for, which are the risks that are ill-advised and which are the risks that you should take a little bit. So there is that learning component for it that I hope players get excited about, as it really allows them to feel their mastery of the game grow.
As a solo game, does it take up an awful lot of space? I mean, is this something you're going to need to... Because I remember people talking about Tiny Epic Dungeon, for instance, and the fact that it came in a really, really small box, but it ended up spreading across the entire table.
So do you mean Tiny Epic Quest, or did I miss one of Scott Alm's
Yeah,
games?
sorry, yeah, probably Tiny, yeah.
Because you immediately piqued my interest. I'm like, ooh, what's Tiny Epic Dungeon? I want that now. just watch now, like in 3 months, there's going to be Tiny Epic Dungeon on Kickstarter.
No, yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, what was I going to say? Yeah, so, no. Yeah, I mean, yeah, probably got it wrong, pretty much.
Yeah.
Tiny Epic, I mean, there's Tiny Epic Quest, there's probably Tiny Epic Sandwich, Tiny Epic Chess, there's probably but all I remember is, all I remember is the amount of space that game took up was absolutely massive for a game that supposedly came in a small box. Now, Unbroken looks like it comes in a relatively small box, so how much space do you need in order to play it then?
It does come in a small box, and while I wouldn't call it, a tiny game to play in terms of the footprint that it has, it is by no means is it large. I would say that takes about as much space as Friday to play.
Oh, okay. Not that much at all then. That's okay. That's okay. Because you just imagine somebody on a long journey on a train or something like that being able to kind of play it on a table in front of them, or be able to sit in the living room while their partner's doing other things like watching the TV or playing a video game, and you're able to sit there with a coffee table in front of you and be able to get a couple of games in.
Yeah, it's definitely enough for like a coffee table is enough. I would, with some creative scooching, you can probably fit it on a tray.
All right, okay, well, that'd be cool. Yeah, how much is it going to be?
So it's going to be about $29 Canadian plus about a few bucks extra shipping. So all in all, for people who are, let's say, within the EU, let me see what the current exchange rate would be. See, that's how
now, this is live. This is live. You're getting live exchange rates.
Yes.
All thanks to
all exchange rates, because subject to change as per your current.
It's about £16, basically.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was checking euros. That's not right. Ugh. Great geography.
That's okay. Well, if you know the euro price, then I could say the pound. So how much is it in euros?
It's about 18 pounds with.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so that's including shipping, and we are arranging for European Union friendly shipping so that backers can be sure that they don't worry about VAT and all of those other unpleasant things.
So how long's the Kickstarter is going to be the 27th? How long are you running it for? Is it the standard kind of 31 days for the Kickstarter, or?
Yeah, it's a standard 30-day campaign. It starts on March 27th and goes until April 25th.
All right, okay. And how have you found it in terms of marketing this game? Because it's different from your previous game, Cauldron. Has it been a different approach to kind of marketing this game?
Yeah, very much
because
so.
It is a solo player, yeah?
Very much so. And I think a part of it also is because in the 3 years between when I first ventured into this whole game design and publishing experience, I think I learned a lot in terms of, about the board gaming community and the kind of spaces to interact there are, starting from, all the social media to Board Game Geek and everything. But I think the most different thing that happened for this time was the fact that I could reach out to so many personalities that cover specifically solo games, and I could be very sure about the fact that this is the type of game that they would enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, I was able to get prototypes and print and plays not only to some of the mainstream reviewers. Like, I'm very, very excited, for example, that Rado is going to be doing a review of the game.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it really means a lot, because I've watched so much of his videos for games that I was learning or wanted just to check out. So to see him covering Unbroken was a very special treat for me. But also to reach out to some of the sort of smaller, independent, like up and coming reviewers that are out there that form this really tightly knit and very encouraging and supportive community, as I found out. It's Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, Giles from Both Sides of My Table, as you mentioned.
Yeah,
they're like
Giles is excellent, and if you're listening, Giles, you are excellent. So there you go.
I agree. You are. Yeah, there's I could really go on for quite some time listing all of the amazing people from the solo community who have played it and have helped sort of raise the profile of this, and talking to fine people like yourself on the podcast. There's so many podcasts that are dedicated specifically to solo gaming. I'm just, as I mentioned in the beginning, I was really impressed with the community that exists around solo gaming, and I feel very thankful for the support that community has extended to Unbroken this far.
That's excellent. What we'll do is we'll make sure that the Kickstarter link goes into the show notes so that we have notes to show. However, if people have listened tonight, and I'm aware it's a quick one, but that's because of time constraints and everything like that, where can we find you on the internet webs if they want to track you down, Artem?
Well, the easiest way to get in touch with me is on Twitter. I am at Art Safarov. There's also a Facebook group that I keep for Altema Games, and I'll send you all the links for these places.
Mm-hmm.
Altemagames.com is a website that I keep, and I'm also very active on Board Game Geek, as you can find me talking about Unbroken or any other amazing games out there.
Excellent. So, also, as I say, we'll make sure that we take all those links in, and we will point people in the right direction for that. Best of luck with the campaign, Artem. I hope it goes swimmingly well for you. And I mean, at £19, that's not an awful lot of money at all, is it? It's very, very reasonable indeed, and I'm sure that Giles will have a lot to say about it.
Putting a lot of pressure on Giles with this, eh?
Sometimes he needs a little bit of pressure now and again.
Well, we'll consider this as promotion.
Yeah, exactly. Listen to both. Go and check out both sides of the table.
Yeah, you will have a review of Unbroken up, so go and check it out.
It's both sides of my table as well. Better get it right, because otherwise he will shout at me. If you want to keep an eye on what we are doing, go to Google, search for We Are Not Wizards. You will find us on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. You'll also find us on the various kind of podcast catchers of your choice. So that'll be your Spreaker, your Stitcher, your Acast, your Podknife. You can find us through our website, we'renotwizards.com. You can jump onto Spotify. You can find us there. And feel free to stream away. We are on Spotify. I have no idea why. Press the button, I guess. You can also jump onto Apple Podcasts, and you can leave us a if you give us a subscription, that would be fantastic. If you give us a rating or review, that would be absolutely wonderful. If you are going to give us a rating or review, remember to don't give us 10 because it makes us big-headed, but don't give us 1 because it will make us cry. Give us a 5 because it's in the middle and it's average. And we're a little bit average. But the person who's not being average tonight is the rather fantastic, the rather wonderful Mr. Artem.
You're being too kind. Kind.
Safarov.
I'm getting all of my Scottish dose today. That's wonderful.
There you go. Okay. So, thank you very, very much for coming on, and best of luck with the campaign. There are only a couple more things to do. The first thing is to remember that we are many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Artem?
I don't think so.
No, of course not. We are scrambling, we're surviving, we're kind of scraping by the skin of our teeth. We are getting into fights with monsters and horrors of the dungeons and deep and the underground, and we are fighting forward to survive, and we will be many things, but we shall definitely try and remain unbroken by the end of our campaign. And the second thing is to say goodbye. So it's a goodbye from Artem. Say goodbye, Artem.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Richard. I really appreciated talking to you, and thank you so much for everyone who listened to it. I hope to see you on the Unbroken campaign, and keep playing good games.
Excellent. And it's a goodbye from me. Stay safe. Roll 6s. Check out Unbroken when it's coming out. I mean, come on. You can't play with games with your friends all the time. Sometimes it's nice and enjoy your own company. But until the next time, goodbye.